Do you know how many women unknowingly awaken the very thing a man spends his entire life trying to silence? It's not his lust. It's not his longing. It's his ego, the wounded beast that Carl Jung once warned could consume a soul before it ever meets the light. Most women think they're arguing with a man when they challenge him, but they're not. They're arguing with the terrified child trapped beneath his hardened armor. The ego is not confidence. It is not power. It is not real masculinity. The ego is a fortress, a fragile one, built out of everything he fears you'll discover about him. At 2 a.m., when the world goes quiet, and the screens stop glowing, and the lovers have gone home, there's only one thing left to keep him company: his reflection in the mirror of his mind. And that reflection is cracked. Jung knew this secret. He called the ego a mask of consciousness, a necessary illusion for survival, but one that becomes dangerous when mistaken for the self. The problem? Most men fall in love with the mask, and most women fall in love with the man behind it, only to realize later he has no idea who that is. This is why some men resist intimacy, not because they fear losing you, but because they fear losing the character they've spent years pretending to be. They fear you will see them, their real face, naked beneath the projection. That's the ego Jung feared most, the ego that refuses to die. And yet, paradoxically, real love requires ego death, not the soft, romanticized version you hear in modern cliches. The real thing, the shattering, the breaking of pride, of identity, of every false narrative he's told himself to avoid facing the truth. Here's where you come in. You may not realize it, but you, the emotionally intelligent woman who no longer begs for crumbs, you are his mirror. Not the mirror that flatters, but the one that reveals. Your silence, your detachment, your refusal to play the role he assigned you, these things terrify his ego because they strip away his illusion of control. When a man meets a woman who triggers his soul instead of feeding his ego, he faces a crisis. It's not about you leaving. It's about what you leave behind, the echo of his own reflection staring back at him, asking a question he cannot ignore. Who am I? Without the applause, without the power games, without her attention validating my existence. This is the forbidden territory Jung spoke of, the shadow confrontation. Most men avoid it at all costs. They run to distractions, new women, louder careers, temporary escapes, anything to avoid the confrontation with the self. But the wise woman knows, if she truly loves herself, she will not chase him into his avoidance. She will hold her ground, knowing he must walk through his own night alone. Some women wonder why a man pulls away just when things become real. They blame themselves. They overanalyze every word, every text, every silence. But it's not you he's rejecting. It's his own fear. The terror that if he lets his guard down, he'll crumble. And the deeper terror that if he doesn't, he'll stay hollow. Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." That's why he feared the ego, not because it exists, but because it fights to stay alive even when it's destroying the very love it claims to desire. If you've ever wondered why a man suddenly becomes cold, distant, or defensive after moments of intimacy, understand this. You didn't break him. You didn't push him away. You simply touched the wound he's been hiding all his life. The question is, will he face it, or will he retreat back into the mask? The woman who knows her worth won't beg for the mask to love her. She'll wait for the man beneath it to wake up. And if he doesn't, she'll walk, because she knows the difference between attachment and love. The ego Carl Jung feared is not the loud, boastful arrogance that most people imagine. It is something far more insidious, a subtle but relentless whisper in the back of the mind that says, I must control this moment, or I will cease to exist. At the core of the male psyche, especially in the modern world, lies this hidden fracture. Society trains boys from an early age to armor themselves with achievement, dominance, and emotional detachment. Vulnerability is seen as weakness. Silence becomes power. Control becomes survival. But what happens when a woman comes along who doesn't need him? What happens when she stands before him, not as an object to be won, but as a mirror of his own incompleteness? That's when the panic begins. Jung warned about this collision between the ego and the unconscious. When the conscious mind is confronted with something it cannot control, love, loss, true intimacy, it triggers what he called the individuation crisis. The ego resists this process because it knows that real growth requires sacrifice. And the first thing it must sacrifice is itself. So when a man finds himself awake at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, realizing she's not coming back, it's not just heartbreak he feels, it's annihilation. The roles he played no longer work. The games he mastered have no meaning. The version of himself he once admired now feels hollow. That moment is the threshold of his own dark night of the soul. Some men will do anything to avoid crossing it. They will text another woman, reopen old wounds, drown themselves in distractions. But the wise woman, she doesn't interfere with this descent. She understands that real transformation cannot be forced. It must be chosen, alone, in the silence of ego death. In the darkness, he will replay their moments together. But he won't remember the small fights or the surface-level conflicts. He'll remember the look in her eyes when she saw through him, when she touched the place he was hiding, the wounded child beneath the armor. Men don't obsess over women who simply give them pleasure. They obsess over women who awaken something sacred and terrifying, the realization that they are more than their titles, their achievements, or their dominance. They are souls in search of wholeness, and the ego is merely a gatekeeper trying to block the door. At 2 a.m., a man starts to realize this. The walls of his carefully constructed identity begin to crack. He sees himself, perhaps for the first time, not as a master of control, but as a fragile being, suspended between fear and freedom. This is why so many men fear intimacy with conscious, emotionally sovereign women. Not because those women are too much, but because they reveal too much. When a man meets a woman who triggers his soul instead of feeding his ego, he has only two choices. He can project his fears onto her, blaming her for his discomfort, calling her too intense, too demanding, too independent. Or he can surrender to the process Jung described, the painful but necessary death of the false self. Most men choose the first path at first. It feels safer, easier, more familiar. But at 2 a.m., when the silence roars louder than his pride, he knows the truth. She wasn't the problem. She was the mirror. He remembers her calm detachment, her refusal to chase, her silence that spoke louder than any argument. She knew something he didn't, that love is not possession. It is not control. It is reflection. And for a man who has never looked into the depths of his own soul, this is both the most forbidden and the most liberating experience of all. Will he rise and face it, or will he run back into the comfort of his ego's prison? The woman who knows her worth watches in silence, not out of cruelty, but out of wisdom, because she understands. A man who fears his own soul can never love hers. The ego, Jung warned, is a mask. A necessary one, perhaps, but still a mask. It allows a man to function in society, to build, to conquer, to appear strong. But behind the mask is something ancient, something primal, the self. The self is vast, infinite, and connected to every shadow and every light a man has ever repressed. And when a woman enters his life who touches that part of him, the part beyond the mask, the ego trembles. Have you noticed? Some men become addicted to women who trigger this fracture. They don't always understand why. On the surface, they may even criticize these women, label them as too much, yet in secret they replay every word, every look, every moment of silence, because deep down, he knows. She awakened something no one else dared to touch. It's not just attraction, it's not just desire, it's ego death disguised as love. And most men are not ready for that. They're ready for validation. They're ready for adoration. But they're not ready for reflection. At 2 a.m., when the world goes quiet and no one is watching, this is the hour of reckoning. His mind may wander to memories of her, the way she looked at him, not with the gaze of a woman who needed saving, but with the gaze of someone who already saved herself. He remembers how uncomfortable that made him feel, how it forced him to confront the unbearable truth that his power meant nothing to her if it was built on falsehood. Jung called this moment the confrontation with the shadow. It is the meeting between the man he pretends to be and the man he actually is. And no man escapes this confrontation unscarred. Most men try to seduce their way out of it. They seek new distractions, other women, quick dopamine fixes that silence the gnawing ache. But the ache returns, always. Because the woman who triggered his soul planted something deeper than lust. She planted self-awareness. And self-awareness, once seated, cannot be removed. It grows silently in the corners of his mind. It whispers when he's alone. It dismantles the carefully scripted stories he tells himself about who he is. This is the real danger of feminine power. It's not sexual, though it may seem that way. It's spiritual. It's the power to expose the ego for what it is: fragile, frightened, defensive. At 2 a.m., a man may try to convince himself that he's over her. But the truth is, he's not haunted by her absence. He's haunted by the version of himself she revealed, the one he now has to face alone. She was the portal, the invitation. She did not break him. She cracked the shell so the soul could breathe. Some men collapse under this weight. They grow bitter. They lash out. They return to safe, shallow relationships where nothing is ever required of them except performance. But others do the unthinkable. They stay in the discomfort. They lean into the void. They surrender. These are the men who evolve. And it is the woman who knows this, who stands firm in her boundaries, who does not chase, who allows him to experience his ego death without rescuing him, that becomes unforgettable. Not because she clings, not because she begs, but because she disappears at the exact moment his transformation begins. She knows he must do this alone. That love is not about completing each other, but about becoming whole in solitude first. At 2 a.m., he realizes that the chase was never about her. It was about outrunning his own reflection. And now that she's gone, the mirror remains. This is why he obsesses. Not because she left, but because she left him with the truth. A woman like that is not just a lover. She is a catalyst. And a catalyst is always dangerous to the ego. Most men are taught from an early age to build walls, not bridges, to armor their hearts, not expose them. Society rewards the masculine ego when it dominates, achieves, and controls. But what no one tells him is that the very walls he builds become his prison. And it's not until a woman confronts him with her silence, her mystery, her refusal to play by the rules of egoic romance, that the cracks begin to form. He starts to notice the void inside him. This is the forbidden moment Jung alluded to, the moment when the mask slips and he is left alone with his unmet wounds. A man in this state doesn't just miss her. He grieves something older, something primal. He mourns the lost connection to his own anima, the inner feminine he has neglected, silenced, or suppressed. She represented that anima in the flesh, not because she catered to his comfort, but because she mirrored back his discomfort. She forced him to see the parts of himself he had banished. The seduction of ego is that it makes a man believe he is whole when he is fragmented. But the woman who triggers his soul does not fall for this illusion. She can see the fractures beneath his confidence, and she refuses to participate in his masquerade. This is why he thinks of her at night, long after the romance has ended, because on some unconscious level, he knows she saw him fully, without filter, without distortion. And being seen like that is terrifying. Yet it's also the beginning of rebirth. In the depths of the night, the ego whispers to him, "Go back to who you were before her. Forget her. Move on." But the soul whispers something different. Become the man she saw hiding inside you. This is where the tension lives, between regression and transformation. And most men are at war with this tension, caught between the safety of ego and the danger of evolution. Jung warned that the ego will do anything to avoid annihilation. It will justify, it will deflect, it will manipulate reality to preserve its identity. But the man who lets go of this fight, who allows himself to be dismantled by the loss, becomes something rarer, a man of depth. This is not the man who texts at 3 a.m. out of desperation. This is not the man who seeks revenge by proving how easily he can replace her. This is the man who sits in silence, eyes open, heart raw, and asks himself the questions he has spent a lifetime avoiding. Who am I without my armor? What part of me did she touch that no one else dared to? What if this pain isn't punishment, but initiation? These are the dangerous thoughts, the thoughts that lead not back to comfort, but into the unknown. And for the woman, this is where her real power lies. Not in seduction, not in compliance, but in spiritual detachment. She is not waiting for him to return. She is not watching her phone for missed calls. She is not rewriting the past or lowering her standards to soothe his fear. She is somewhere else, building her life, protecting her peace, expanding her consciousness, because she understands the sacred law of individuation. Each soul must face its own darkness alone. The feminine wound is to believe she must save him. But the feminine awakening is to realize she is not his savior. She is his mirror. She reflects his potential, not his completion. And so, while he wrestles with his ego in the midnight hours, she rests. Not because she has forgotten him, but because she has remembered herself. This is the alchemy of feminine power, to hold the door open to love, but never abandon the temple of self for anyone who refuses to evolve. He will think of her again and again in the quiet hours when his defenses fall, not because of what she did, but because of who she refused to become. A woman who triggers his soul is not someone he moves on from. She is someone he carries within him, like a secret scar, a holy wound, a compass pointing toward the man he could become if he chooses courage over ego. But the choice in the end is his. There's a haunting truth Carl Jung whispered between the lines of his work, a truth few dare to face. The ego doesn't fear failure. It fears death. Not physical death, but psychological death. The collapse of the identity it has spent a lifetime building. And love, real love, especially from a conscious woman, threatens that death more than anything else. Most relationships are designed to protect the ego. Flirtation, validation, surface-level affection, they are all part of the same dance, a dance that allows a man to maintain his illusion of control. But every so often, a woman arrives who refuses to participate in this ritual. She doesn't chase, she doesn't beg, she doesn't mold herself into his expectations. Instead, she stands as a reflection, a mirror to his shadow. And this is where the nightmare begins for him. At 2 a.m., when sleep becomes impossible, he lies there staring at the ceiling, thinking not just about her absence, but about what her absence reveals. He wonders, did she leave because of me? But the deeper question, the more terrifying one is, who am I without her reflection? You see, for many men, A woman becomes more than a partner. She becomes a container for parts of himself he cannot face. His tenderness, his insecurity, his longing for unconditional acceptance. She holds it all unknowingly. And when she leaves, he is left with the full weight of what he projected onto her. Jung called this the anima projection, the dangerous tendency of men to assign their unlived inner world to a woman. At first, it feels like love, but it's not love, it's possession, it's fantasy. It's the ego's attempt to avoid the work of self-integration. And when the woman walks away, when she chooses silence, solitude, or self-respect over entanglement, the projection collapses. Suddenly, he's not just grieving her. He's grieving the version of himself he thought was real. The charming mask, the ego-constructed identity, the man who always had the upper hand, gone, shattered. In the dead of night, this collapse feels like drowning. He scrolls through old photos, replays conversations, searches for loopholes in memory that could absolve him from his discomfort. But there are no loopholes. There is only the reckoning. This is where many men falter. They run back to egoic strategies, numbing, distraction, replacement, anything to escape the confrontation with the shadow. But some, the rare ones, choose a different path. They let the death happen. They allow the dark night of the soul to engulf them, knowing that on the other side is not annihilation, but transformation. Because here's the paradox Jung warned of. The ego fears death, but the soul craves it. The soul knows that only through ego death can true love, true masculinity, and true freedom emerge. The woman who triggers this process is often misunderstood. Some call her cold, others call her distant, difficult, or too much. But in truth, she is sacred. She is the guardian of his awakening. She is the woman who would rather lose him than betray herself. And that decision, that refusal to participate in his egoic game, is the very thing that plants the seed of his evolution. But whether that seed grows is not up to her. It is up to him. In the quiet hours, as he lies awake, he will either return to his old patterns or step into a new identity. An identity forged not in ego, but in awareness. And for you, the woman watching this, understand this. Your silence is not cruelty. Your distance is not punishment. Your refusal to compromise your worth is not abandonment. It is initiation. When you stop trying to fix him, save him, or soften his lesson, you give him the greatest gift of all, the space to meet himself. And if he chooses to rise, he will return, not as a fragmented man looking for comfort, but as a whole man ready for communion. If he does not, you remain whole regardless, because the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.